Hello and welcome to the Gaggle What We Challenge, and if necessary, destroy media narratives. I'm George Szamuely, and I just want to record a short video on the massive campaign underway, undertaken by members of the deep state in the United States, in alliance with the Democratic Party of the United States, and of course in alliance with the key NATO powers of Europe, the campaign to pressure President Trump to impose major sanctions on Russia and to force President Trump to increase assistance to Ukraine, military, financial, economic assistance, and above all, to force President Trump to commit himself in an enormous way, in a way greatly in excess of that of the erstwhile President Joe Biden, commit President Trump to Ukraine and therefore the war against Russia. It was entirely predictable that this would happen. The question now is, and it's a matter of real urgency, whether President Trump will resist these entreaties or whether he will succumb, just as he did during his first term in office. If you recall, President Trump during the 2016 campaign had promised that he would seek to improve relations with Russia. And during the early days of the administration, he did indeed seem to be going down that path, but that's not what happened. And he got pushed into imposing one sanction after another against Russia. Most peculiarly, he agreed to sanction Russia for supposedly interfering in the 2016 election. That is interfering allegedly on his behalf, something that he had actually denied. He had denied that he had received any kind of assistance from Russia, but nonetheless, Trump, for a variety of reasons, was blown off course and pursued an anti-Russian course during his presidency, which he probably didn't want to, but nonetheless, that was the final outcome. So there's a real question now whether something very similar will happen during his second term. So what triggered this whole thing was the recent missile and drone attack from Russia on Ukraine. Now, this was in retaliation for a serious drone attack on President Putin's helicopter while he was visiting Kursk. A very serious escalation on Ukraine's part. And clearly, and this is something that we've pointed out many times before, drone attacks by Ukraine can only be undertaken with the help of satellite technology, whether from the United States, United Kingdom, France, or whoever, satellite technology that can select the targets and can select the trajectory of the drone flight, because the trajectory is very, very complicated, because the drone has to avoid the anti-missile defense systems or the anti-aircraft systems. So that can only be done by a very sophisticated technological trainers. And therefore, any attack on Putin's helicopter had to have been done in collaboration with the Western powers. But what happened was that last weekend, during a kind of impromptu news conference by President Trump, he went off on a tirade against President Putin And this, of course, was lapped up by the media, lapped up naturally by Ukraine President Zelensky, and of course, lapped up by the feckless European leaders. So let's first of all take a look at what he said um, during this impromptu news conference. Um, and here he's asked about what's going on um, with these Russian attacks on Ukraine. Again, as always with the media, there's no context is ever provided. It's always as if out of the blue, Russians just attack Ukraine out of the blue. Nothing happened before, and of course afterwards there'll be nothing will have happened since.
Yeah, I'll give you an update. I'm not happy with what Putin's doing. He's killing a lot of people, and I don't know what the hell happened to Putin. I've known him a long time, always gotten along with him, but he's sending rockets into cities and killing people, and I don't like it at all. Okay? We're in the middle of talking, and he's shooting rockets into Kiev and other cities. I don't like it at all. Franklin, what do you want to do about it? I'm surprised. I'm very surprised. We'll see what we're going to do. What am I going to tell you? You're the fake news, aren't you? You're totally fake. All right, any other question? I don't like what Putin is doing, not even a little bit. He's killing people. And something happened to this guy, and I don't like it.
A Russian commander reportedly said that Putin was almost caught in the middle of a drone attack from Ukraine. So do you have any?
I haven't heard that, but maybe that would be a reason. I don't know, but I have not heard that. Secretary takes that.
So note what happened here. He's gone off on this wild tirade, and suggesting that Putin is just attacking civilians and going crazy, and just completely random basis, he's bombing Kiev, and he says in this very menacing way, "I don't like it. I don't like it. We'll see what I'm going to do," and so on. And then a reporter asks, "Well, a Russian commander has said that this was in response to a Ukrainian drone attack on a helicopter carrying President Putin." Trump seems very surprised by that information, and he says, "Well, I haven't heard that," and then he just continues with the same thing. But nonetheless, it was very strange that a reporter seems to have heard this news, conveyed this news to him, and the president of the United States, seemed a little surprised by it. Yet that would be something that he should certainly know about before he goes off on this tirade. Now, of course, the media ignored all of that what had preceded this Russian attack, and instead focused on the attack, which apparently was so horrific and savage and whatever, and above all, with lip-smacking glee, the media reported, "Well, Trump is getting fed up with Putin. Could these sanctions, the sanctions that we've been waiting for, as if somehow these sanctions are going to make this huge difference. These sanctions we've been waiting for, could they be now finally in the pipeline?" So if we look at the story here, there was very little coverage of the attack on President Putin's helicopter. There was this one mention in the Telegraph, but I found it very difficult to find anything in the Western media about this. And so here's the Telegraph says Putin's helicopter fended off drone attack. And it says Putin's helicopter was forced to shoot down drones while he was aboard, a Moscow official said on Sunday. The Russian president's aircraft was involved in an air defense battle after an unprecedented Ukrainian drone assault. And then Major General Yuri Dashkin, an air defense commander, told state television. That's probably the commander that that reporter was referring to. The incident was said to have happened last week when the Russian leader was on tour of Kursk, part of which Ukraine previously occupied. And then during the period, this is, they're quoting Dashkin here, during the period when the president was working in the Kursk region, the enemy launched an unprecedented attack with unmanned aerial vehicles. He added, was simultaneously conducted an air defense battle and ensured the safety of the presidential helicopter's flight in the air. And then he goes on, Russian forces destroyed several Ukrainian drones during the operation. The task was accomplished. The attack of the enemy drones was repelled, and all air targets were hit. Now, one has to say right away that it's a very serious business. If there really was an assassination attempt on President Putin, it's no wonder that the media decided not to cover this story at all, even though they know that's some serious business there. A drone attack on Putin's helicopter, a drone attack that the media know perfectly well could not have been undertaken by the Ukrainians without the assistance of Western powers, whether it was the U.S. Military and intelligence personnel, whether it was the British, the French, the Germans, or whoever. It's a serious business, and that's why the story was just dropped. No one wanted to cover it. Yet it obviously needs a lot of thinking about, because if this had succeeded and Putin would have been assassinated, then the implications for everybody, but particularly the United States, would be quite serious. So whoever did this, whoever gave the go-ahead for this assassination attempt, he bears a lot of responsibility. But anyway, Trump yesterday, it's Tuesday, sent out this strange truth. He's saying what Vladimir Putin doesn't realize is that if it weren't for me, lots of really bad things would have already happened to Russia. And I mean really bad. He's playing with fire. Now, of course, this is somewhat incomprehensible. What does he mean really bad things would have already happened? And I mean really bad. What kind of things are you talking about? Nuclear attack? Assassination of the president? Is that something that's in the works? I mean, is that something that people have presented to him as options, and he waved them aside? Or is this something that he's even thinking about? Because that's what it sounds like, and particularly in the aftermath of what looks like an assassination attempt, it's like that's what Trump is threatening. Or that and that, well, that these terrible things that we could do, we haven't done thanks to me. Really want to know what exactly he had in mind. It all kind of brings to mind, remember Victoria Nuland, who talked about these unpleasant surprises that were waiting for President Putin. And then soon after that, she kind of mysteriously left the Biden administration. So one really does wonder what kind of dirty tricks are being planned within the bowels of the deep state. But in any case, this truth followed on from his earlier truth, which he sent out after the New Jersey news conference, he said, I've always had a very good relationship with Vladimir Putin of Russia, but something has happened to him. He has gone absolutely crazy. He's needlessly killing a lot of people, and I'm not just talking about soldiers. Missiles and drones are being shot into cities in Ukraine for no reason whatsoever. These are very strange things for him to be saying. It's perfectly understandable and reasonable that he wants to bring this war to an end, and it's perfectly understandable and reasonable that he um, is appalled by attacks on Kiev or anywhere else. But what he can't do is saying that he's needlessly killing a lot of people, and I'm not just talking about soldiers. In other words, there's needlessly killing civilians when he at least should know that there's really no targeting of civilians. There's certainly um, civilian casualties, but there isn't any targeting of civilians. And it's particularly bizarre for him to get so supposedly emotionally overwrought about Kiev when he doesn't seem to care very much about Gaza, where civilians are targeted. And the overwhelming majority of the casualties are indeed of civilians. So he seems to take that in his stride, even as he seems to get so worked up about Kiev. Um, and then he goes on. I've always said that he wants all of Ukraine, not just a piece of it, and maybe that's proving to be right. But if it does, it will lead to the downfall of Russia. Again, you wonder what does that mean? The downfall of Russia. It's a um, it's a it's like he's issuing a threat now. If he plans, if the plan is, or at least if he's threatening massive bombing of Russia, which no doubt the United States can do, I mean, then the obvious consequence will be the massive bombing of the United States, the massive bombing of the European continent. So the downfall of Russia will be accompanied by the downfall of the United States and others. Anyway, it says, likewise, President Zelensky is doing his country no favors by talking the way he does. Everything out of his mouth causes problems. I don't like it, and it better stop. This is a war that would never have started if I were president. This is Zelensky, Putin's, Biden's war, not Trump's. I'm only helping to put out the big and ugly fires that have been started through gross incompetence and hatred. Now, taking on board these two truths, as well as his somewhat overwrought comments in that impromptu news conference, you can say Trump is vaguely threatening to do something. Hasn't spelled out what he was. He's vaguely threatening, but he's not actually done anything. He's just essentially just shooting his mouth off. But of course, when you do that, the media and all the deep state operatives, as well as members of his Republican Party, take those comments to mean that Trump is on the brink of making a major decision and doing what they want him to do, namely throw the weight of the United States against Russia in a big, big way, in a way even far exceeding what President Biden had done. So here is the Wall Street Journal with the headline, Trump weighs sanctions against Russia as relationship with Putin sours. President expresses frustration over new attacks in Ukraine and slow pace of talks. And President Trump is eyeing sanctions against Moscow this week as he grows frustrated with Russian President Vladimir Putin's continued attacks on Ukraine and the slow pace of peace talks, according to people familiar with Trump's thinking. The restrictions likely So, like, it wouldn't include new banking sanctions, one of the people said, but other options are under discussion to pressure the Russian leader into concessions at the negotiating table, including a 30-day ceasefire supported by Ukraine that Russia has long rejected. Trump might also decide not to impose new sanctions. So, the 30-day ceasefire, as we've discussed many times before, this is now a kind of an article of faith among the media, among policymakers. Oh, we need the 30-day ceasefire, as if they actually are serious about the 30-day ceasefire, rather than, hey, we need a break in order to deliver a lot more weaponry to Ukraine and get the army reorganized and give them a nice 30-day rest. Just given all the pronouncements of these political leaders, particularly in Europe, do they sound like the pronouncements of political leaders who are interested in peace rather than to regroup, reorganize, rearm, and then restart the campaign? And then it says Trump is also tiring of the peace negotiations and is considering abandoning them altogether if a final push doesn't work. People familiar with his thinking said a remarkable change for a leader who campaigned on his ability to end the conflict on his first day in office. It is unclear what would happen if the U.S. retreats from the peace process and whether Trump would continue to provide military support to Ukraine. And then, but Trump has been unable to coax major concessions from the Russian leader on a negotiated peace with Ukraine, and Putin has intensified the war recently. And hours after Trump's comments on Sunday, Russia launched its largest ever drone and missile assault on Ukraine overnight into Monday. Ukraine's Air Force said Russia launched more than 350 explosive drones and at least 9 cruise missiles. The Russians characterized the strikes as retaliation for Ukrainian bombings within Russian territory. So, again, there's other than that cursory comment, the Russians characterized the strikes as retaliation for Ukrainian bombings. There's no prehistory to any of this, just as there will be no post-history. We just always focus on the events in isolation, the events that the West wants to focus on. And then for weeks, Trump has been resisting pressure to reprimand Putin for failing to agree to a ceasefire that Ukraine supported. And then allies such as Senator Lindsey Graham told Trump that Putin didn't want a deal and only punishments would make him seriously negotiate. This, of course, is a lie constantly put about, that somehow if you impose yet another round of sanctions, it'll force Putin to negotiate. Now, there have been 17 rounds of sanctions. He hasn't forced Putin to negotiate. Why would the next batch do it? Well, of course it won't. And they know it won't. That's important. You must remember, they know perfectly well that the next round of sanctions isn't going to make any difference. The next round of sanctions after that isn't going to make a difference. The 20th round of sanctions isn't going to make a difference. What they want is to provoke a war. The more Trump goes down this path of sanctions, arming, escalation, the more likely is it that there will be a full-scale war, which is what the goal here is. So we should always just ignore all of the talk about, well, the sanctions, real sanctions package, that will force Putin to negotiate. They know perfectly well. Lindsey Graham, whatever else you can say about him, he's not a fool. He knows perfectly well another round of sanctions isn't going to force any change of policy in Moscow. But 3 key views colored President Trump's thinking, officials said. First was his dislike for Ukrainian President Zelensky, who Trump felt encouraged further conflict by pushing for sanctions, even though Zelensky agreed to a ceasefire. On Sunday, he blasted Putin. Trump also criticized, as he blasted Putin, Trump also criticized Zelensky in a post on social media where he said the Ukrainian leader is doing his country no favors by talking the way he does. And then Trump also believed that additional sanctions on Russia wouldn't curb its ability to wage war, but would hamper efforts to revive US-Russian economic ties. This, of course, is the perfectly sensible, reasonable position, which is, you've imposed all these sanctions, they haven't made any difference. The only effect a new round of sanctions will have is that any real prospect of negotiations between Moscow and Washington will just simply disappear. Once the sanctions are in place, then there'll be nothing really to negotiate about. Finally, Trump felt that he knew Putin and the Russian leader would end the war as a personal favor. Putin's unwillingness to budge has soured Trump's view of his counterpart, especially after a phone call last week during which Putin refused to sign on to a ceasefire. In a call with Zelensky and European leaders afterwards, Trump said that he didn't think Putin really wanted peace, the Wall Street Journal previously reported, even though Trump has never said that. No evidence Trump has ever said that, and this was explicitly denied by his spokesperson, Caroline Leavitt. That Trump ever said that Putin didn't really want peace. So he never said that. This is just simply, again, made up. And now that, again, as always happens when you make something up, it then just gets repeated and then becomes accepted as truth. And then here, Trump is now on a path familiar. This is hilarious. Trump is now on a path familiar to previous US presidents who have believed they could work with Putin only to see their efforts fail. George W. Bush in 2001 said of Putin that he looked the man in the eye and gleaned a sense of his soul and had determined that Putin was very straightforward and trustworthy. Later, Putin invaded Georgia. Barack Obama and his administration in 2009 sought a reset with Putin, only to be lectured by the leader and later watch him march into Ukraine and seize Crimea. Now, this thing with George W. Bush is, of course, particularly hilarious when we recall, and I'm sure gagglers all know this story, that after 9/11, Putin was among the first to call Bush and to express his solidarity with the United States and to offer Russia as a transshipment hub for troops and weapons into Afghanistan. And so, he acted as a friend. And George W. Bush, as a way of expressing gratitude, then in 2002 walked away from the ABM Treaty, which had been signed in 1972. That was a sore point with the Russians. They set great store by the ABM Treaty, the Anti-Ballistic Missile Treaty. So, it's always this kind of history whereby the Americans are always this innocent party, and then Putin is doing these really amazing, nasty, mean things in Georgia. Leave aside the question of the role of the Bush administration in possibly encouraging Georgian President Saakashvili to invade South Ossetia in 2008. Leave aside George W. Bush pushing for Ukraine and Georgia's membership into NATO in Bucharest in 2008, something that the Russians were very strongly opposed to. That doesn't get any mention. No. It's just, wow, what a mean person Putin is. Similarly with Barack Obama. He's sort of reset in 2009. And then look what happened. Where let's recall, Barack Obama pushed for regime change in Libya after having promised the Russians and the world, indeed, that that the United States and its NATO allies wouldn't push for regime change in Libya. And then, of course, Barack Obama pushed for the overthrow of Viktor Yanukovych in Kiev in 2013-14. Again, these things never appear in this kind of history. Anyway, here's the Kiev Post. It says Trump seriously considering lifting all Biden era restrictions on Ukraine's war effort, sources say. And then he goes on, the United States has not yet lifted all Joe Biden's era restrictions on Ukraine's warfighting, but President Trump is seriously considering to do so, two senior Western officials told Kiev Post Washington correspondent. Then all the previously imposed restrictions, whether eased or not, are currently under the review by President Trump. Believes that the current status quo does not serve our common interests in bringing Russia to the negotiating table. Now, it's very important that we see these media stories for what they are. Trump hasn't said any of these things. He's not said in public any of those things. Yeah, he fulminated in New Jersey. He sent out these angry truths, but he hasn't said he intends to impose sanctions. He hasn't said that he's going to increase or even continue with weapons transfers to Ukraine. Remember, he hasn't appropriated any new weapons packages for Ukraine. Everything that's being sent now is stuff that was appropriated under the Biden administration. So he hasn't done any of those things, let alone he's going to lift restrictions. So this is a media campaign. So we have to understand that for what it is. This is a media campaign to force Trump's hand, just as when we look at these news conferences, the only thing the reporters ask is, well, when are you going to impose sanctions on Putin? What are you going to do about Putin? Aren't you being led by the nose by Putin? Isn't Putin running rings around you? How can you trust Putin? Don't you think we need to put the pressure on Putin to force him to the negotiating? That's all they ask. It's all about pressing Trump to get on board with their favorite plan. And then again here we have this Kiev Post. One Western official told Kiev Post Monday night that Trump's final decision on punishing Russia, as well as the next phase of Ukraine support, will be discussed during meetings with German officials in Washington, D.C. this week. According to the source, German Foreign Minister Johann Wadephul is planning to visit the U.S. Capitol in the coming days. And then here's the Washington Post. You see again the same headline. Trump's frustration with Putin boils over with no Ukraine peace deal in sight. President Donald Trump lashed out at the Kremlin on Tuesday for its unwillingness to negotiate a ceasefire with Ukraine as he continued to consider increasing sanctions against Russia. Now, notice how they put this forward. This is the Washington Post. He lashed out at the Kremlin for its unwillingness to negotiate a ceasefire with Ukraine. Was that in any of the truths? I don't think so. Was that anything that Trump said in that news conference in New Jersey? I don't think so. This is just made up. He's lashed out at the Kremlin for its unwillingness to negotiate a ceasefire with Ukraine. He just made it up. He never said any of that. He lashed out. He's angry and frustrated, but he never said what the problem is. That's just, oh, it's because of the ceasefire, even though he had, when he recounted the details of his telephone conversation with Putin, he made no mention of the ceasefire. Yes, I mean, way back when, in February, there was the talk about the 30-day ceasefire. But Trump hasn't brought that up since then, and J.D. Vance said that the administration has ended the obsession with the ceasefire. The ceasefire is an obsession of the NATOLand, the European powers of NATOLand and Zelensky and the media. But Trump hasn't said that. An escalation from his previously friendly tone towards Vladimir Putin that came as the president appeared to grow gloomier about his ability to broker peace in Ukraine. But it was still unclear whether Trump was truly prepared to impose more sanctions, and he has kept quiet about whether he supports a bipartisan effort in Congress to bolster them. Russia has faced years of US sanctions, although experts say they could be tightened against its energy and banking sector. So again, you see what's happening here. There is this campaign. The people undoubtedly recall what happened during his first term. Started off the administration started off on the right tone. You remember the conversation between General Flynn and Ambassador Kislyak, during which General Flynn, the incoming national security advisor, told Kislyak, don't, in response to Obama's sanctions and Obama's expulsion of Russian diplomats, Flynn said, don't overreact. New administration is coming in, and we will reevaluate the U.S.-Russian relationship. And then, there was a friendly meeting, if you recall, in the Oval Office between the President Trump and Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov, and Kislyak was there. It was a friendly meeting, and then everything just went off the rails. Russiagate and the always the drumbeat for wait, what are you going to do about Putin? Putin was interfering in our elections. You got to do something about Putin. And yeah, Trump went off and pursued a policy that he clearly didn't want to do. So something like this could happen. There's no question. I mean, there's a possibility that this could happen. It'll be a disaster for Trump, absolute disaster, because then he will be sucked into this war. He will be forced to pursue Biden's policy. Biden's policy failed. You're not going to force Russia to capitulate. I mean, it's just not going to happen. It's I've been critical, of various aspects of the way Russia has conducted this war, but Russia will not capitulate. Russia will not lose this war, and so therefore Trump will be sucked into a war that will be going on when he leaves the presidency, and he will leave the presidency, therefore, as a failed president. You said you were going to bring the war to an end. The war has intensified under your watch. There's no prospect of any peaceful outcome, let alone a prospect for a U.S. victory, and therefore you have failed. And the presidency will have been an unsuccessful one. So it doesn't seem to make sense for Trump to go down this path, but it may happen. Any case, this is my thoughts for today. This campaign, we have to watch this. It's quite a dangerous moment, and we'll see if if Trump will be pushed off his course the way he was back in 2017, 2018. Anyway, thank you very much for joining me. And remember, if you like the gaggle, please like, share, and subscribe. See you soon.